Characteristics of Selected Thoughts by Edmund Phelps. Dynamic Economic Growth, Phillips Curve Extended with Expectation, the Hypothesis of the Natural Rate of Unemployment. The text discusses key concepts of Edmund Phelps concerning the dynamics of economic growth, as well as the hypothesis of the natural rate of unemployment and the extension of the Phillips curve to include expectations. Topic 1. Characteristics of Dynamic Economic Growth. According to Phelps, contemporary economic growth theory is extremely complex and encompasses various approaches to analyzing the factors determining long-term economic development. One of the key contributors to this field is Edmund Phelps, an American economist who, through his research and analysis, has influenced the understanding of the dynamics of economic growth in the long term. In his characterization of dynamic economic growth, Phelps emphasizes the importance of innovation, labor market dynamics, and the adaptation of economic institutions as key drivers of economic growth over time. He points out the difficulties in measuring the level of dynamic modern economy and characterizes the most important indicator as productivity growth driven by innovation. In order to achieve dynamic economic growth, according to Phelps, citizens should demonstrate entrepreneurial character traits and behavior. Phelps calls them contemporary values. He divides them into three groups: individualism, vitalism, and self-expression. He attributes the decline of these traits and the slowdown of economic growth in the United States to changes in citizens' mentality and investment horizon. He refers to the change in attitude as the decline of the pioneering soul, which is characterized by a departure from more risky aspects of modern, personal values and a shift towards the values of the wider society. Secure, well-paid jobs, for example in corporations, have become the main goal for young adults. Materialistic and emotionally, socially shallow motivations characterize the ubiquitous culture of consumption, driven by billions of dollars in marketing budgets as well as social value systems. As Robert T. Kiyosaki points out, these systems and values support the creation of ideal employees, stifling entrepreneurial thinking, which Phelps considers necessary for dynamic productivity growth through innovation. This situation is long-term worse for both the economies of these countries and the individuals living in them. The role of CEOs in major companies has also changed. In the past, large corporations were often managed by their founders who naturally strived for innovation and long-term growth. Currently, Phelps observes the short-term orientation of corporate management, mainly focused on delivering adequate profit levels in the next quarter. This is partly due to the ownership structure of the shares of these companies, in which the majority of shares are held by financial institutions. The motivations of fund managers are among the short-term reasons. The decline in adherence to contemporary values creates an image of employees devoid of creativity and externally controlled, in need of corporate order and ready-made jobs. Topic 2. Phillips curve extended with expectations. The Phillips curve illustrates the relationship between unemployment and inflation in the economy. In 1958, economist William Phillips proposed this curve, noting that there is an inverse relationship between the unemployment rate and inflation in the short term. Inflation usually rises when the unemployment rate falls. This means, among other things, that expansionary monetary and fiscal policies allow for a reduction in unemployment. Understanding the Phillips curve has changed with the development of economic research. Economists now distinguish between short and long-term Phillips curves. The long-term Phillips curve shows that there is no permanent correlation between inflation and unemployment in the long run. Phelps's theory of adaptive expectations indicates a decline in the effectiveness of the Phillips curve in the long term. If the government were to adopt an expansionary monetary policy, inflation would rise and unemployment would fall, based on the Phillips curve. However, with subsequent similar attempts, economic participants would quickly associate higher inflation with rising wages and adjust their behavior based on previous experiences. They would predict that inflation would erode their purchasing power, so loosening monetary or fiscal policy would have less impact on employment growth and improving the labor market situation. A key element of Phelps's analysis of decision-making in this context is the attention he pays to average inflation expectations as a key variable, in addition to directly measurable variables such as actual wage and price levels. In Phelps's models, firms' expectations regarding the level and dynamics of average wages and prices are key determinants of their individual decisions, and thus employment and production. His solution was to argue that the Phillips curve should actually be defined as the relationship between employment or production and the difference between actual and expected wage or price levels and dynamics. The recognition that inflation expectations are a key variable means that central banks must be more aware of how their actions can change expectations. Phelps argues that monetary policy must ultimately be understood as a problem of long-term planning, where short-term decisions affect future possibilities and mechanisms. Monetary and fiscal policy should be analyzed in terms of their impact on the evolution of inflation expectations, adaptive expectations. The problem of how to optimize monetary policy, taking into account the dynamics of private sector learning, including the problem of the best modeling of these dynamics, remains an important topic of current research. Topic 3. The hypothesis of the natural rate of unemployment. The hypothesis of the natural rate of unemployment, proposed by economist Edmund Phelps in the 1960s, posits that there exists a natural rate of unemployment in an economy below which inflation remains stable. This concept revolutionized the understanding of the relationship between unemployment and inflation and has since become a cornerstone of modern macroeconomic theory. According to Phelps, the natural rate of unemployment is determined by structural factors within the economy, such as the efficiency of labor market institutions, the level of technological advancement, and the degree of mismatch between available jobs and the skills of the workforce. These factors create a baseline level of unemployment that is unavoidable even in a fully functioning economy. Phelps argued that policymakers should aim to achieve the natural rate of unemployment rather than attempting to drive unemployment below this level through expansionary monetary or fiscal policies. He contended that such efforts would only lead to accelerating inflation without any sustainable reduction in unemployment. The hypothesis suggests that attempts to push unemployment below its natural rate in the short term would ultimately result in higher inflation, as firms are forced to increase wages to attract workers from a smaller pool of unemployed individuals. This phenomenon, known as the Phillips curve, describes the inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation in the short run. However, Phelps also acknowledged that the natural rate of unemployment is not fixed and can change over time due to shifts in structural factors or changes in economic policy. For example, technological innovations or changes in labor market regulations may alter the equilibrium level of unemployment. The concept of the natural rate of unemployment has important implications for economic policy. It suggests that policymakers should focus on creating an environment conducive to long-term growth and stability, rather than attempting to fine-tune short-term fluctuations in unemployment. This approach emphasizes the importance of supply-side policies aimed at improving labor market flexibility, promoting education and skills training, and fostering innovation and productivity growth. In conclusion, the hypothesis of the natural rate of unemployment highlights the inherent trade-offs between unemployment and inflation and underscores the importance of addressing structural factors to achieve sustainable economic growth and stability. While the natural rate of unemployment may evolve over time, understanding its determinants is crucial for designing effective economic policies.